Monster Hunter World is a game that I have sunk more than enough time into, to be honest. Playing it from beginning to end, getting all the best armor and weapons, and then completing 100% of the game's achievements has left me with more than enough knowledge on how the game works. And now, Monster Hunter Wilds is just around the corner at this point, exactly 30 days from now as of when I'm writing this exact sentence on January 28th to be precise. The new game coming to the series and a ton of hype surrounding it, a lot of people have taken up Monster Hunter World as a means of getting familiar with the franchise. So what I wish to do with this video is help new players get into the realm of Monster Hunter without spoiling their experience. And if you're here because you're new to Monster Hunter, welcome. This game series is incredible, and I am glad to be the one to help you today. However, this video is being made with the assumption that you have the Iceborne DLC installed. Without further ado, here we go. Point number 1, Defender weapons and Guardian armor. You will hear a lot of people tell you to not use this equipment, myself included, and for good reason. This equipment was added as a means of letting players blast through the base game in order to experience the Iceborne DLC from a fresh start as soon as possible. On paper, it's fine. After all, if all you cared about was the DLC but you didn't have an endgame character, you could just slap this equipment on and barely have to worry about anything. But in this lies a pretty huge problem. By giving you everything, you learn nothing at best and bad habits at worst. It cuts out a major part of the gameplay loop, which is using materials to upgrade your weapons and craft new armor. Granted, you do have to upgrade your defender weapons, but beyond that, using this overpowered gear would ultimately leave you with no idea how to craft the right gear to make your weapon and playstyle comfortable to use in the long term. This is a problem that I came across myself when I first played through Monster Hunter World. I ignored the advice to not use this equipment and was left completely flummoxed by the difficulty spike when I got into Master Rank, and by the time I was over 300 hours in and doing in-game content, I still had no idea what I was doing as far as armor skills went. Armor skills, which are basically perks that are tied to the pieces of armor that you equip, are what you use in order to power yourself up, and not knowing how these work will leave you completely lost and in need of new gear as soon as you enter Master Rank. Especially when even the most basic of Master Rank armor has twice the defense as the best armor sets in the base game. The armor skills that the Guardian armor provides is undoubtedly powerful, and you will be using these armor skills in most, if not all of your armor sets in the future, but these skills can be acquired through other means and different armor sets. If you still want to use this equipment, there's nothing really stopping you, but I would highly advise to try at least experimenting a little bit before you head into Master Rank. Point number 2. Picking a weapon. There's 14 weapons available for you to use, and I would highly recommend taking a few minutes in the training area to mess with them and find one that you vibe with the most. Want something slow and methodical with a chance at big numbers? You might like the Greatsword. But if you wanted something a bit more technical, you could go with the Charge Blade. If you want something fast that can weave in and out of attacks at breakneck pace, you might like the Dual Blades. But if you wanted something else along those lines that has a more defensive option, you could try using the Sword and Shield. Wanted to give something irreversible brain damage? Pick the Hammer. Wanted to give something irreversible brain damage but also need an engineering degree to use? Pick the Hunting Horn. There's plenty of fun to go around with these 14 weapons, and if you stick around, I'll give you a helpful tip or two for each weapon later in the video. Point number 3, resources. Grab literally everything. Every little collectible that you come across has a use, be it ammo for your slinger, ammo for your bow guns, or as crafting materials for healing items and other extremely useful consumables such as traps. Soon after you begin your adventure, you'll also be able to begin farming for these materials passively, and you can upgrade your little collection facilities for more cultivation options and storage in the future. Personally, I would recommend farming honey to make mega potions, as that will be your best and most convenient source of healing. Point number 4. The Resource Center. In exchange for some monster drops or other items, you can unlock camps for more convenient travel through locales, and unlock new foods for better meals. And if you grab the register bounties, you'll be able to stockpile an extremely useful resource for upgrading your armor. Point number 5, your Slinger and Clutch Claw. Your Slinger can be loaded with various ammo that you find scattered throughout each locale, and they will also drop from monsters when you tenderize them with certain weapons, or they will drop when the monster reaches certain health thresholds. Most weapons can utilize Slinger ammo via the Slinger Burst, which can essentially give you a second option for starting combos if the other is too slow or unavailable, or behave as a shortcut for your combos. Your Clutch Claw is going to be a tricky tool to use. Monsters move around a lot, and unless they're distracted, they can and will purposely knock you off of them. However, there's one thing that all but one monster does. The Clutch Claw Stagger, or Clagger for short. A monster will flinch and stumble back with drool pouring out of their mouth. This is the Clagger. It lasts for exactly 6 seconds and allows you to grapple onto them in order to tenderize one of their parts. And when you grapple onto them, this 6-second timer resets. Different weapons have different quote-unquote strengths when tenderizing, that being light and heavy. Light weapons take 2 tenderizing attacks to soften a part, but will drop slinger pods most of the time, while heavy weapons will always tenderize with 1 tenderizing attack, but won't drop any slinger ammo. With all that said, here's a thing or two about each weapon that might help you along the way. Weapon number 1, the Greatsword. One of the extremely useful tools you have available to you as a Greatsword user is the Tackle. While charging an attack, or just after a dodge roll, you can perform a tackle to muscle yourself through an attack that would have otherwise interrupted you, and this applies to roars as well. However, an attack that would leave your character flat on their back cannot be tackled. A certain spiky adversary you will face during the campaign will leave you quite terribly acquainted with this fact if you aren't careful. Weapon number 2, the Longsword. Foresight Slash can be performed at any time. It cannot interrupt an attack, but it can be used after most of your attacks. Its effectiveness can be increased drastically through the use of the Evade Window armor skill, which essentially lengthens the amount of time you're invincible while using attacks that grant you iframes. Weapon number 3, the Sword and Shield. Perfect Rush, for better or worse, is going to be your biggest source of damage. Knowing when to perform it is crucial, but knowing how to perform it effectively is the other half of this battle. A trick you can use to instantly perform the backstep to begin your Perfect Rush is to unsheath your weapon via guarding and then performing the backstep input, which on keyboard and mouse would be simultaneously pressing S and right-clicking. This allows you to backstep at any time, but be careful about your timing. Any misinput will mean that you perform a guard slash instead, which will leave you locked in place for a couple of seconds. On that note, backstep provides you with iframes, which can be extended with the evade window. Weapon number 4, the Dual Blades. While in demon mode, after performing a demon flurry rush, left round slash, and left double round slash, which sounds complicated I know, but it's literally just 3 right clicks, after performing this combo you can press your aim slinger button to perform a claw attack. Despite being considered a light weapon, grappling onto the monster this way will allow you to tenderize a part in 1 attack. Weapon number 5, the Hammer. While charging, you can press right-click to store power, increasing your weapon's damage and changing its combos. Releasing the charge button at various charge levels will give you different attacks, with the level 3 charge attack additionally changing depending on whether or not you're moving. This charge state will be cleared upon sheathing your weapon or getting hit, which does include getting stunned by a monster's roar. Weapon number 6, the Hunting Horn. The biggest piece of advice I can give for the Hunting Horn is to ask literally anyone else how to use this thing, because much to Pickle's chagrin, I absolutely fucking hate using this thing. Weapon number 7, the Lance. Your shield is a lot stronger than you think, and even with just a couple levels of guard, you'll be exceptionally difficult to knock over. Weapon number 8, the Gun Lance. The Gun Lance, at the face of it, has a lot of facets to it, but it's a lot simpler than you would think. Generally, you're going to want gun lances that can load the max amount of shells, which will be the ones with the normal shelling type. Wormstake Cannon also scales off of how much slinger ammo you have loaded in your slinger when you activate it, and thus, the Stone Thrower armor skill is amazing for its upkeep. Weapon number 9, the Switch Axe. You can perform a zero-sum discharge by pressing both left and right mouse buttons at once, and if your lunge hits, you will latch onto the monster and begin dealing damage. If you happen to miss the initial lunge, you can press the aim slinger button to perform a claw shot, and if that lands, you'll be clutch clawed onto the monster and can perform a zero-sum discharge from there. Weapon number 10, and my personal favorite, the Charge Blade. Amped Element Discharge, known as AED, is extremely useful. It does a ton of damage in 1 hit, and with impact files, it racks up a ton of KO damage if you hit the head. But with your shield charge, you instead perform a Super Amped Element Discharge, or SAED. This attack is still phenomenal, and it does a ton of damage, but sometimes you might feel the need to use the Amped Element Discharge instead if you want something more precise. You can still perform an AED by holding S while performing the SAED. This is super handy for sniping the head or tail to get some juicy knockouts or a tail cut. Weapon number 11, the Insect Glaive. Chaining your mid-air attacks, or helicoptering as it's called, is pretty fun, but it does very poor damage, at least it does in World. However, it is a great tool for repositioning yourself to perform a downward thrust. Weapon number 12, the light bowgun. Foregoing defense in favor of evasion and reloading on the move is this weapon's bread and butter. Within the list of bowgun mods, you may see a mod for Wyvern Blast Type 2. What this does is change your Wyvern mines to instead be a reactionary tool, rather than a preemptive one. When you shoot a mine, it will knock you backward while it arcs forward and lands, exploding after a short delay. If a monster's attack hitbox intersects with the mine while it is active, it will detonate for massive damage. Weapon number 13, the heavy bowgun. Just like the light bowgun, the heavy bowgun is a simple point-and-shoot weapon. Its slowness lends itself well to a more defensive playstyle, with 2 shield mods behaving more or less just as well as other shields. However, you should keep note that the shield is only active while you are aiming and not firing your weapon. And lastly, weapon 14, the bow. This weapon, unfortunately, is not very beginner-friendly. Being an extremely element-focused weapon, even more so than dual blades, it requires a significantly higher amount of investment into its builds than the weapons that can get away easier with dealing raw damage or non-elemental damage. It also requires a ton of stamina to use for any reasonable length of time, so you will find yourself chugging down more energy drinks than your typical sweaty League of Legends player. And so, that is that. A short and sweet video that will hopefully aid you in some way. I'm glad to have you here in Monster Hunter World, and the rest of the games, of course, and I hope to see you in Wilds.